Hey, it's another transmission video on the 356. I promise this is the last one. Thank you guys for being here. Give yourself a pat on the back if you've watched all of them. Give me a thumbs up as well. I know it's techie. There's not a lot of content on 356s in general, but especially on the transmission. So I need to kind of finish what I started. This will be the last one. This one's the really important one with the ring and pinion setup. A lot of these measurements have already been done before I even disassembled the transmission. I wanted to have a baseline because this transmission did run pretty quiet, and I don't want to veer too far from that because it's a known good setup, but I did improve it even more. I got the ring and pinion depth dialed in almost perfect. Here's how you do it. And a real quick view in here. It's in neutral right now, but this is turning and feeling great. This is the new bearing. That's the one that really started all this mess. And then the main shaft also spinning well on its new bearing. Just pop that in. Now, when I spin this one, the pinion shaft moves. My pinion depth tool is inside. It's an old 914 carrier housing outfitted with a dial indicator. And I have the completely assembled gear stack assembled with the original gasket. And what I'm getting is 59.41. The previous measurement before I took all the bearings and gears off was 59.39. So the difference in bearings makes a small change, but it's a change in the wrong direction. So the target dimension for this pinion gear is 59.35. So I'm 0.07 off, I think that's 7. I'm off in the wrong direction. So I need to move my pinion closer to the center line by, it's only like 0.03 of an inch. So I'm gonna take apart the gear intermediate plate junction here between the housing and the intermediate plate. I'm going to replace that gasket with one that's 0.03 thinner. That should put me right into the sweet spot of the pinion gear. And that's why I measured it before and after, so I could really account for any changes that occurred in the stack up of bearings, and also to know which way I can move it. Luckily, I have room to move it in. These were torqued with the torque wrench, so the torque of these and the torque of the nuts on the end do affect the reading. So you have to have things at the recommended torque everywhere in the whole stack up between here and here. The other thing I've done better this time is I have the carrier, the measurement tool is preloaded in its differential bearings. The differential bearings are in there, and there's a slight gap on this cover because the carrier is actually being squeezed into preload, and that prevents any slop in the bearings from affecting the measurement. So this time when I reach in here and move the carrier, I can pull it and push it. It doesn't influence the reading at all. The position of the carrier is very much in the center line. So that's an improvement as well. It's been hard not to disrupt this original gasket here through all the cleaning on it. I just didn't want to lose the reference dimension because this transaxle actually wasn't noisy when I drove it last. So I'm just trying to get it back to where it was or closer to the target dimension. If you didn't have all these measurement tools and you just replaced a couple bearings, you'd probably be okay. But in my case, I didn't trust the previous rebuilder because I found a lot of problems inside. There's a couple dowel pins that make removing this a little bit tricky. You gotta hit it with the rubber hammer. And I have not replaced the seals yet, so I will replace those after all this dimensioning gets worked out, because you could damage the seals swapping it in and out. This is that original gasket I was talking about, so it's already pretty thin. We'll try to find one that's thinner. This Loctite doesn't really dry. It's anaerobic, so it's not going to fully harden. It's kind of a softer sealant. I'm gonna torque it to spec. I'm gonna let that cure for a little bit. I'm going to do one more final check on the pinion depth, and that should be the final time though. I don't anticipate doing this again. I am going to have to untorque it to put the nose cone on. All right, the final pinion depth measurements are in, and you can see inside there, that's the dial indicator. It's reading negative 0.67 millimeters, and it's rock solid. It's right where it needs to be. I was measuring this earlier today. We were having a heat wave right now. It was about 85 degrees. It went from 0.66 to 0.67. So what that means, I have my carrier calibrated at 59.8, somewhat arbitrary, but that's what I calibrated it at. And then the dial indicator reads 0.66 or 0.67, subtract that. Then I add the distance of the razor blade, that's 0.23 millimeters. It gives me 59.37 or 59.36, depending on the temperature. You're supposed to do it at room temperature, which is pretty much closer to this one. Now, the marking on the pinion is a plus 13, so it's 59.22 plus 13 would be 59.35. So I am very, very close. 59.36 is very close. You can't adjust it any tighter than about 0.05 because that's the graduation in the gasket thicknesses. I'm not sure about the solid shim thicknesses, but basically I'm super happy with the number. It's right at the target dimension, 59.35. If it was probably 10 degrees cooler, it would be exactly 59.35. I'm super confident in that number. I can, push the differential. I can measure it in any orientation. I can, try to shift the bearings. And if it's not preloaded correctly, you can move it. But I get the same 0.67 no matter how I push on the carrier. This measurement is super robust. This time when I measure the housing depth of the trans, I'm going to include a shim. So that's going to create a 13 thousandths preload on the bearings. That'll make sure they're seated in the housing. Okay, there's just a slight wiggle to the plate with the 13 thousandths preload. So I'm going to go ahead and torque those down and make sure the bearings are fully seated. Okay, that should be enough to secure the cover. The other thing that's interesting to note about that is with that much preload, it makes it really difficult to turn the bearings. I mean, you can feel the bearings are unhappy. Not to the point where it's damaging them, but they just don't spin with the same amount of free play. So that's something to keep in mind when I do the actual differential. There shouldn't be this much torque required to turn it. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm measuring the height of the housing with the external dial indicator, and then I'm subtracting the width of the actual differential carrier that belongs in this car. That gives me the preload. I'm trying to get it close to about 5 thousandths of an inch, between 5 and 6 thousandths of an inch. That's the total bearing preload. And then, depending on the backlash, I will move shims from either the crown side or the non-crown side in order to dial in the backlash. So I'll do that now. And I like to just give it a few taps to get that race started. The differential's mostly in, and I have the axle nut here on backwards, so I was hammering on that and got it to where I can use the nuts to take it the rest of the way. But the preload is really close based on the physical dimensions, but now I'm trying to get the backlash. And you can tell right now there's tons of backlash, but it's not all the way seated yet. So we're going to take a backlash measurement and then decide what to do with the shims to get both the backlash and the preload within spec. We should be pretty close, but we'll see. The string from my garage ceiling is just kind of keeping this supported so it doesn't bang into the housing. Okay, this is the one way to check the backlash, and I did this before I took this transmission apart, but I have this block attached here to the reverse gear. So when I rotate this, That's the backlash right there. And then I have this stick and it's going inside the drain hole and it's locking the crown wheel. That cannot turn at all. It's wedged with the stick. So I'm not putting a lot of force on the pinion shaft anyways. It's basically just enough to move this gauge. So with this gear locked, 17. So 17 divided by 3, that's the actual backlash. The reason why you divide by 3 is because the diameter of this reverse gear, I'm measuring it at the outer diameter, is about 3 times larger than the actual center line of the pinion gear. And so there's a factor 3 difference there. I'll probably measure it here directly at the crown wheel. I think it's a little bit more of a direct measurement. I'll try it both ways, but this tells me I'm already really close to the ballpark because 17 divided by 3 is, let me get my calculator, 0.00566. And I'll look at the book again, but I think that's right in the perfect range. I just looked at the picture of the ring gear and it's marked 0.15 for backlash. So 0.15 converted to inches is 0.0059, and that is extremely close to what I'm getting on the reverse gear. So like I said, I'm gonna double check it here on the crown wheel end, but that's looking really close. This was super glued on, pops right off. This is just a reminder to put the cotter pins in. I want to leave it off to the last minute. I'm just getting a sense of the bearing, load as you rotate it. So it's nowhere near as tight as it was when I had the mandrel really cinched down, but it's nowhere near as loose as it was when the mandrel had free play. So there is a preload in the bearings. You can feel it just by rotating the bearings in the differential housing. So I think it feels good. This will also mark the die chem. So we're looking for marks on the die chem. So we'll look at the wear pattern in a bit. As I told you, I wanted to measure the backlash at the actual crown wheel. So this is an approximation of that. I basically have this pointer attached. It's not attached to the axle because the axle has a lot of movement inside the fulcrum plates. So there's a lot of play inside the axle, but the differential carrier is right here. This is the bearing, that's the differential carrier. So what I've done is I've taken a plate that's the exact same curvature as that, and I've super glued it to the inside of the carrier, and then there's a pointer welded to it. So this is all a very rigid connection. And then I've just got my dial indicator, down on top of the cover plate. So I really need 2 hands to do this correctly, but I basically get 5/1000ths of an inch right here. This probably should be moved out just a little bit. So I should have picked a different spot other than that stud. That stud's kind of in the way, but there's a certain diameter at which you want to measure this, and I think it should be a little bit further out. If it was a little further out, the number might be slightly larger. Like I got before, I got 5.5 on this side. I'm getting about 5 on this side. Also guys, to prevent the pinion shaft from moving, I just ran a bolt through here, and this is running up against the retainer plate. So this locks the reverse gear, which in fact locks the pinion gear. So that's what I did. I'm gonna release the tension on that. It's not a lot of pressure. It's not actually pulling the pinion back or anything. It's basically just locking it like that. And this time my pointer is out a little further. I moved the nut. You can kind of see where the nut used to be. Now the nut is directly over this bolt circle. And that's kind of what it looks like in the factory tool. The factory tool is a big bulky thing, probably more robust than this, obviously. But yeah, so just with one hand, I'm getting 0.04 to 0.2. So it's a bigger number. That's 0.16. Target's 0.15. 0.05. So I'm putting a lot of pressure on these axles, and I can make it click and be pretty rough with it. But no matter what I do, I get the same number on the readout every time. I'm getting a very repeatable number. Even though it's a delicate needle and it's held on with super glue, I think it's a pretty effective way to do this. Especially since I've done it two different ways at the rear, 2 locations here on the side cover. So I am done. I'm really happy. This is all turning out really well. I couldn't be happier with the Backlash. So I'm going to take my camera and look inside the gear, see if we can see any wear patterns on the gear. I'll pull all this off. Super glue is dissolvable in acetone, so I'll clean up all the residue in there. So that's not enough clearance because I can't move it like I did before. So I need more thickness on the gaskets. It should move like this when the nuts are loose. It moves nice and free. That's how it should be in real life. And then you can hear it clicking up and down. So we want that clicking to be minimal, but we want it to move freely. And that's a wrap on the transmission. It's as good as I can get it. Actually, I could have done a little bit more. Some of the hardware is not plated. I usually do a few pieces at a time just to keep track of everything. So these plugs aren't plated. This probably could be replaced if I wanted it to look better, but it's all cosmetic at this point. I'm really hopeful this is going to be a good running transmission, and I'm really excited to try it out. The new starter bushing is in there. New seals, both front and rear. I have new boots, but I don't have the clamps on it yet. I want to wait till the axles are in the horizontal position. Here's some hardware that probably could get replated right here. You can see the old versus the new. That piece is painted, drain plugs in, but no oil. These will need to get touched up a little bit of scratching on there from last time I installed it. These roll pins need to be pushed in. It's probably a little easier to do with it in the car. And then of course the axle seals on the end.